Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McLean. It's good to be on with you, praise be to God. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties we've had so far in the show, but it is going to be a great show. In fact, Archduke Eduard Habsburg is going to be our guest. He's going to be on at 30 past the hour. We're going to be talking about his brand new book, The Habsburg Way. And we're going to be giving a copy of that book away to somebody on the Insider email list. Could be you. You got to join the Insider email list to get your chance to win the brand new book by Eduard Habsburg. Go to thestationofthecross.com/ACT for those details. Matt Dooley is going to be our guest. We're going to be talking about those leaked documents, that air guardsman that got arrested, what's going on in Ukraine, all of that at 15 past. But we're already behind the ball, so let's just jump straight into the gospel for today, which is John chapter 21, verses 1 through 14. Jesus revealed himself again to his disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. He revealed himself in this way, together with Simon Peter, Thomas called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, Zebedee's sons, and two others of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." And they said to him, "We also will come with you." So they went out and got into the boat. But that night they caught nothing. When it was already dawn, Jesus was standing on the shore. But the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, have you caught anything to eat?" They answered him, "No." So he said to them, "Cast the net over the right side of the boat, and you will find something." So they cast it, and were not able to pull it in because of the number of fish. So the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he tucked in his garment, for he was lightly clad, and jumped into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, for they were not far from shore, only about 100 yards, dragging the net with the fish. When they climbed out on shore, they saw a charcoal fire with fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you just caught." So Simon Peter went over and dragged the net ashore full of 153 large fish. Even though there was so many, the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, "Come, have breakfast." And none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they realized it was the Lord. And Jesus came over and took the bread and gave it to them, and in like manner the fish. This was now the third time Jesus was revealed to his disciples after being raised from the dead. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. St. Chrysostom would say in Haydock's commentary, "We may here see the different characters of the two disciples, or the two apostles, Peter and John. The former is more ardent, the latter more sublime, the first more vehement, the last more penetrating. For these reasons, John was the first to know Christ, Peter the first to hasten to him." You know, we fault Peter quite a bit. We fault him quite a bit. He denied our Lord, right? He seems like a bumbling kind of a guy. I don't agree with that characterization, but nonetheless, he is the guy who obeys the Lord, gets on his knees and says, "Depart from me, Lord, for I'm a sinful man." He is the guy who follows him, leaves everything behind and follows him. He is the guy who steps out of the boat and onto the water. He is the guy who didn't walk away at the teaching of the flesh of Christ, that we must consume the flesh of Christ in the Holy Eucharist. He is the guy who repented and turned back to the Lord instead of hanging himself like Judas. He is the guy who hastens to the Lord with zealousness. If only you and I would be the same and have the same zealousness as Simon Peter. Man, amazing things would happen nonetheless. All right, praise be to God. We have a break. We're going to take a break, even though it feels like we just started. Sorry about those technical problems to begin with, but we are going to have retired Army Colonel Matt Dooley on the line right after this to talk about those leaked documents and the Ukraine situation. All that and more coming up next. Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McLean. So good to be on with you. Praise be to God. Coming up at 30 past the hour, we're going to have a conversation with the Archduke of Austria, but ambassador to the Holy See from Hungary, Eduard Habsburg, about his brand new book, The Habsburg Way, 7 Rules for Turbulent Times. In fact, I'm giving a copy of this away to one of our insiders. If you want to join the insider email list, you could possibly want a copy of this. Just go to thestationofthecross.com/ACT for the details of getting signed up to that email list. I'll send that email later today. Joining us right now by phone, though, is retired Army Colonel Matt Dooley. Good morning to you, Matt.
Hey, good morning, sir. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, grateful for your time today. Thank you. Yesterday, we saw dramatic footage of the FBI taking down a 21-year-old Massachusetts Air National Guardsman being charged with leaking classified documents to an online gamer group. What do you make of this story?
Yeah, there's 3 elements to this, and my first take on this is I don't think we're casting a wide enough net. When you talk about a young airman, an E3 or a private first class and an Army equivalent, for him to have access to classified documents means that some other people far more senior to him have also made some mistakes. So I'm interested in the chain of custody. The second question I have is, how much time was he allotted with these documents to take photographs of what appears to be hundreds of these documents? He had some alone time. So that's the offense that I'm interested in. He had it. He took pictures of it. That's bad enough. But then he posted it online, apparently to win some arguments with his friends, an online discussion group called Discuss. And then what happened after that? Obviously, it got out. It wasn't just a couple of dozen people that he's talking to. Someone took it and started posting it in other places, and the Internet's forever, and the Internet can populate very quickly at the speed of light. And the Russians got a hold of it and obviously tried to modify a couple of the documents. One of them, I think, was the most obvious, was the fudging of the actual casualty number. There's no way they've only lost 17,000. But that I think diverges from the central issue is the mishandling of classified documents and the fact that our allies don't trust us because our method of controlling sensitive information is just not secure.
Some people have taken exception to the fact that this is a 21-year-old kid. I mean, I served in the military. Military is made up of a lot of very young people. Do you find that troubling that a 21-year-old would have access to such classified and sensitive documents?
It kind of depends on the unit he's a part of. As I understand it, he belongs to an arm or a branch of the Air National Guard that's an intelligence collection unit that deals in information. And so you do have in each of the branches of service intelligence battalions or intelligence companies that are responsible for pushing information. He was a part of a cyber wing that's responsible for security of digital information. So he would have access to that stuff because he's touching computers. So I would be more concerned if it were, an E3 and an armory unit or an infantry unit. But he would have access to it based on where he was stationed.
Well, the other issue is there's a debate as to what these documents have actually revealed. Some are saying, for instance, at the White House secretary, the communication secretary there said, basically, listen, these are troops. We have troops in Ukraine, but they're there just to track how well Ukraine is using our equipment. Some are saying that, in fact, we have Americans on the ground, as well as British and other people from our allies on the ground actually fighting the Russians. I'm not sure where the truth is in this, but what do you say, retired Army Colonel Matt Dooley?
If you look at the numbers of the troops that are there, we're talking maybe a dozen, maybe a little over. That lines up with the number of troops you might have on the ground if you have an embassy or a consulate presence. That's not enough to be decisive. I mean, if I had 12 to 14 soldiers who were able to go to the front lines and turn the direction of the war at the strategic level, I would want to know who these men or women were. It doesn't line up with the idea that we've got troops actively engaged in fighting. It does line up with having soldiers on the ground doing training for special forces. There's something called FIT, which is foreign internal development. guys who might be training, guys who might be doing what's called white ops, just advisory roles. Maybe in a command post somewhere, but more likely, I think they're there because we have a diplomatic presence, and you have to have some sort of military capability to get someone out, safeguard and protect them until you can get assets in to get them out. And that's what you look at. It's not like we've got hundreds or thousands of trigger pullers on the ground. You just have a very small footprint, and that comes with a little bit of a military presence.
But I worry about the optics into this. And I was thinking when I was looking at this story about a man that I met when I was a kid in ROTC. His name was Sergeant Roy Benavides, Master Sergeant Roy Benavides at the time. And this would have been like 1990, something like that, 1991. He had earned the Medal of Honor in 1968 as an Army Special Forces guy on the border between Cambodia and Vietnam. He helped to save some men who were going behind enemy lines in Cambodia, trying to abduct a Russian-made utility truck that was making its way north through Cambodia because there was a supply line there, and they wanted to prove to the world definitively that, in fact, the Soviets were actively supporting the North Vietnamese army. And I think about that story and what he had to endure for 6 hours in a bloody battle, almost dying himself in the process to try to save his comrades there, his friends, his brothers in arms. And yet we were trying to prove to the world that the Russians were actively involved in supporting material, troops, and other issues in support of the NVA. And he had to go through so much. So I'm thinking about that, and I think, well, what do the Russians think now? I mean, it's sort of the opposite of this. We are, in fact, supplying billions of dollars of money, aid, and material. And now we have advisors on the ground there. Is this a road to escalation? If you're Vladimir Putin, how do you see this? You must be threatened by this reality, no?
Yeah, candidly, I think that the Russians are looking for any scrap of information they could use. They practice information warfare like anyone else. And their propaganda, there's two different directions. There's their outward-facing international attempt to control the narrative, but there's also propaganda designed for internal influence, and you can just watch some of the Russian talking heads on their shows and some of the things that they say. Any little scrap of information, whether it's true or truth adjacent, is going to be manipulated to justify their feelings, to justify this war, and to justify their narrative that this is a defensive action against an encroaching West. So I would not be surprised to see this sort of information, and that's why it's so damaging. I'm concerned with the mismanagement of classified information. I don't care who does it, whether it's an E3 or a former vice president, senator, or someone who puts a homebrew server in a bathroom. Anybody that treats the management of classified information with disregard and a cavalier attitude risks doing this kind of thing to our diplomatic and military efforts, regardless of whether or not you're talking about Ukraine or other issues. There's a reason why it's classified.
I saw another article somewhat related. Seymour Hersh has been putting out reports. He's has a report out that says $400 million have been embezzled by the Ukrainian government from American and foreign aid coming to their country. Do you think that these troops that are revealed in these documents are there to try to get a grip on that, our equipment, the reports that have been going in, that they've been going to the black market and whatnot? Do you think we're sending them there to figure out why there's waste going on?
Yeah, I think oversight is important, and we did say we were going to manage some oversight, and so there's a deliberate, active effort to ensure that what we send there, whether it's weapons or foreign aid cash, is going to the right sources, going to the right direction for the right purposes. It's much harder to mismanage where the weapons go because they are in an existential fight. I would submit that probably most everything that we send there, that's weapons and ammunition, tanks or whatever, is going directly into the fight. It's much harder to track where the funds go, and that's a different challenge. But it makes sense to have folks on the ground, whether it's State Department or military, who are tracking to make sure that what we send goes to the right place. You know, that region of the world culturally, regardless of whether you're talking about the Ukrainians or someone else, has a problem with corruption, and that's the nature of that portion of Eastern Europe. So being suspect, trust but verify, I think is justified.
Let's switch to Taiwan. We have about a minute and a half left with retired Army Colonel Matt Dooley. Taiwan, big war games from China this past week. Heavy pressure pushing ever so closer to Taiwan. And Taiwan is very nervous, it would seem, by looking at the reports. Also, there was a report that Xi Jinping has called his military to prepare for combat. How do you see this? Is this just more posturing? Are we just reading headline news here? Or have things escalated?
I think both. I know it's kind of a milquetoasty answer, but let me be more specific. I think you've got to, when you look at the Chinese and what they say, you have to take them at their word. But a lot of it is posturing. There are things they're going to do internally and things they're going to say outwardly that are a bit different. But what we know for sure is that they view Taiwan as part of one China, mainland China, and they have an intent to eventually draw them into their sphere. That runs into and against our philosophy, which is that they should be separate. Now, we do have a one China policy that President Carter agreed to, but we recognize the sovereignty and independence of Taiwanese to make their own determination about how that comes about, and that's the friction. The rest of the Pacific Rim is interested in this because, as goes Taiwan, so go all of the other territories in the area, all of the other zones of fishing rights and resource rights, which are quite competitive if you're Vietnam or Japan or Indonesia or anyone else in that area. So everyone's interested in making sure that China follows international law and obeys by the rules, and they are becoming more bellicose and more aggressive. But it's important, especially in an era of escalation, that we be very direct and very clear about where our red lines are. And we haven't been in the recent past, and that's my concern, that we end up in a war because of miscalculation and misunderstanding.
So with just a few seconds left on the clock here, on a scale of 1 to 10, what are the chances, do you think we're going to be in an actual conflict with a military conflict with China in the next 2-3 years?
Before Ukraine, I would have said it was a high likelihood. I would say that what's happened with Ukraine and Russia's inability to carry it out, I think, is giving the Chinese a moment of pause. So I would reduce that number to about 50-50.
All right, 50-50. Yikes. I don't even know if I like that number, but retired Army Colonel Matt Dooley, I appreciate you jumping on the line with us today and giving us some insights into these stories. God bless you. God love you. And we'll hopefully have you back soon.
Thanks.
All right, coming up after the break, we're going to have some news for you. And then Archduke Eduard Habsburg is going to be on the program, talk about his brand new book, The Habsburg Way, which I'm giving out a free copy to one of our insiders. If you would like to join the insider crew, all you got to do is free. All you got to do is just go to thestationofthecross.com/ACT and sign up to the insider email list. I'll send an email out later today with all the details of how you might win. Don't worry, it's coming up next. Hi, this is Joe McLean, host of A Catholic Take. Here's a question. Have you seen our new prayer wall at thestationofthecross.com? It's a great place to post your own prayer requests, not to mention to pray for others and their intentions. You know, our Lord said, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of them. Prayer is so important, and that's why the theme of our spring appeal is Lord, hear our prayers. Our on-air appeal is coming up in the first week of May, but you can support us and make a big impact right now. You could call 877-711-8500 or just visit us online, thestationofthecross.com. You can also use the donation page on our iCatholic radio app, or simply return the envelope from that letter that you got from us in the mail. Hey, be as generous as you possibly can, and please consider at least $1 a day or more. Thank you in advance, and may God richly bless you. Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McLean, and here are your headline news. CNA reports Supreme Court to hear case of postal worker who refused to work on Sundays. The Supreme Court will hear oral arguments next Tuesday, April the 18th, in Groff v. DeJoy, a case involving a Christian former postal worker that has major implications for religious liberty rights in the United States. In 2019, Gerald Groff resigned from his position at the U.S. Postal Service after years of allegedly being harassed, targeted, and disciplined for refusing to work on Sundays so that he could abide by the third commandment, to keep holy the Sabbath. Groff then sued the USPS for violating his religious rights after his claims were denied by both a Pennsylvania District Court and the Third Circuit Court. The Supreme Court of the United States agreed to take up his appeal on January the 13th. He is being represented by the First Liberty Institute. CNA reports dictatorship in Nicaragua confiscates monastery. The dictatorship in Nicaragua has confiscated a cloistered monastery and arrested 20 people for activities relating to Holy Week. The Trappist Sisters of Nicaragua, who left the country in February after 22 years of service, reported on April the 11th that the government verbally informed the bishop that the monastery would be taken over by the regime. According to the Nicaraguan media outlet, new requirements are being demanded for such religious to remain in the country. They arrested 20 people when they confiscated the property as well. LifeSite News reports Exorcist Group denounces Russell Crowe's new film, The Pope's Exorcist, about its founder. The International Association of Exorcists, IAE, founded in 1990 by Father Gabriel Amorth and approved by the Vatican in more recent years, issued a statement March the 7th roundly condemning a film about Father Amorth due to be released today. The vision of the trailer, quote, of the film confirms, if necessary, not only its quality as a cinema splatterer, a true subgenre of horror cinema, but its unreliability on such a delicate and relevant issue, close quote, wrote the group. Crowe reportedly studied Amorth's writings, and the film came about due to the production company buying the rights to the priest's story. But the IAE has warned against the film, stating that Crowe's portrayal of Father Amorth does not represent the priest's action or manners. They accused the film's star and producers of having missed the spirit of service that characterized Amorth in his ministry of consolation. Don't go see that film. Instead, there's another film releasing today that you ought to go see, and that's Nefarious. Look at whoisnefarious.com for the details, and those are your headline news. Praise be to God. Joining us right now, we're very grateful, the Archduke of Austria, Eduard Habsburg, also the ambassador to the Holy See and to the Sovereign Order of Malta from Hungary. Eduard Habsburg, good morning to you, sir. Thank you for your time today.
Good morning from Rome, and thank you for having me on your show.
Praise be to God. We're very grateful. I enjoyed going through your book. I've been through about 75% of it, I would say. Lots of very interesting stories and lots to dive into here. I almost wish we had a lot more time. I love history, so I particularly appreciated you telling some of the history about the Habsburgs in particular, but I loved the fact that it was from your perspective, a member of the family, which really pricked my conscience into asking, you know, you touch on this in the book, but what is it like being a Habsburg growing up as a kid? At what point, at what age does it dawn on you that you're a member of a family that has over 1,000 years of history?
So the great thing is that if you're a Habsburg, there is a tailor-made identity for you that is being plopped upon you. And you have the choice whether you embrace it or whether you say, no, I don't want to do that. And it usually happens during school. That's usually automatically when you have history in school, because from 1273 to the 20th century, in every year of European history, the Habsburgs somehow played a role. So at some point, a teacher would turn to you and would say, well, this, of course, Mr. Habsburg must be able to tell us. And of course, you have no clue, because you don't get born with a pre-knowledge of your entire family history. So this is one of the moments. The others is you will accompany your parents to some sort of celebration, you know, a centennial of someone of the family who died, and you would stand there in summer, and there would be Schützen, you know, this is people in traditional uniforms, and some people would would shoot a salute in the air, and your father would give a speech, and you would have to stand upright and behave. And you realize people expect something of you if you're a Habsburg. They somehow expect that you're perhaps more upright, more ethical, or, something. And then you try to figure out what that something is. And with the time, you try to figure out, how do I put this into my life? And what does it mean for my personal path in the world? It's great. It's really great. One thing I did write in the book was you have cousins everywhere. Wherever you go, you have a cousin where you can stay overnight, which is very useful.
Was there a lot of pressure? I mean, the way you described that process of growing aware of what it means to be a Habsburg, did you feel immense pressure as a young man in that regard? I mean, was there a time when you might have wished that you hadn't been a part of the Habsburg family, or was it just something that you always embraced and cherished?
I always embraced it because I'm it's a bit like if you have a spotlight that always flies above your head. Whatever you do will be noticed more. If you do something good, it will be noticed more. If you do something bad, it will be noticed triple. And it will fall back on your family, not just on you. So this is something that you grow up with because people will look at you differently. If you present yourself or get presented as Eduard Habsburg, at least in Europe, many people will know what this is. In the States, they will probably say Habsburg jaw or something like that. But in Europe, I always embraced it. It was wonderful. It came with many perks. I don't want to say that it's not great to be Habsburg. You're cousins with not only Habsburgs, but also other Catholic royal families. So I was in a privileged position to get to know a few of the current rulers in Europe while they were in training, so to speak, and got an idea of their education or service for their country. So no, it was always great. It was always great. And it's a nice family, There are families who were very violent or were great conquerors or were famous for backstabbing or poisoning. We never had that.
Praise be to God. So, again, I liked all the history that you talked about in this book, about your family in particular. But I wanted to ask the question, in your perspective, what would you say was the most difficult time for the Habsburg family? Was it the Age of Enlightenment, French Revolution, Protestant Revolution, or maybe it was the end with Blessed Karl? What was the most difficult time for the Habsburg family, in your opinion?
Well, I would say I would pick out two times. There are several moments that are very difficult. For the egos of the Habsburg, the time between the first Habsburg Emperor Rudolf and the next Habsburg Emperor about 150 or 200 years later, that was very difficult because they had touched the sun, so to speak, and then they were gone. And that was for their ego. But in reality, I think the time that I as a Catholic find most difficult and depressing was probably how the emperors behaved during the Reformation. The Habsburgs are a Catholic family, and the emperors didn't behave in a very Catholic way during the high time of the Reformation. For about 3 emperors, the Habsburgs were very weak sauce. Now that was the emperors. Other family members behaved in a wonderful way and exemplary, and they carried the torch of faith into their countries. But the emperors really, I'm talking about Maximilian II, I'm talking about Rudolf II, and also his brother, didn't cut a very good figure in these years. Then, of course, Joseph II, whom most people in Europe and in Austria especially love, adore, and revere because he was a champion of enlightenment in short years at the end of the 18th century. But he destroyed basically all contemplative monasteries in Austria and about half of the monasteries of his time. Then there were about 2,000 when he began. There were about 1,000 when he left, just 10 years later, and he was just stopped by closing more by his death. So yeah, not everything went smoothly with the Habsburgs.
In the book, you talk about 7 rules. Get married, be Catholic, believe in the empire, stand for law and justice, know who you are, be brave in battle, and die well. Those last 2, I think, speak to every man's heart. It's like, well, that's the part we're going to read first, I'm sure. But I got to tell you, I loved the fact that you start with get married, and you really laid a strong defense, in my opinion, for marriage as something that I feel has been completely under attack in our modern times. Too many Catholics, too many bishops even, are not standing in defense for marriage, the truth, the beauty, the dignity, the foundation of society itself between a man and a woman raising kids. And I think you beautifully discuss this from the Habsburgs' perspective, although not every Habsburg in your line held the line very well, but some did. Blessed Karl seemed to give us a shining example. Who would you say would be the best example in your family?
There are so many wonderful marriages in my family. There are so many people. I wrote about this chapter because there's an old rule: if you write something, write what you know. My wife and I, we have 6 children. We've been blessed with 6 children, and in the book I've been writing about family members and ancestors who had between 8 and 16 children, and Maria Theresia, for instance, what a story. Maria Theresia, in 1740, she became empress. At that point, the Spanish line of the Habsburgs had just gone extinguished. And in the Austrian line, there were only 2 girls left. At the end, just her. The entire responsibility to carrying the family on was on her shoulders. And she managed in 20 years of marriage to get 16 children, to have 16 children, and to save the empire, and to reform it, and to give hope to her people. So she's, and of course her husband, Franz Stefan von Lothringen, were wonderful. Of course, the big example is Blessed Emperor Karl, who for me is an exemplary husband. The eve of his marriage, he said to his wife, "Now we've got to help each other into heaven." And I don't know what would be a better recipe for a good marriage than that. They both were very looking, attractive, loved each other obviously very much, had 8 children. But marriage doesn't only make sense if you're Catholic. I think the state, the basis, the fundament of a good state are numerous families. We, unfortunately, in the States it's different. You still have families with many children. But in Europe, it's 1.5 per family, I'm here in Italy. Italy is a catastrophe. They have an incredible low demographic point. Hungary has been, my country, Hungary, where I'm ambassador, since about 10 years we've been trying to encourage people to have more children by offering them real financial help, but also other encouragements. And it seems to slowly work, but it's a long, hard path to convince people. And it's the greatest thing in the world. My life was changed by growing up with 6 children. By living the growing up of 6 children. It changes everything. It's the greatest gift you can give each other as a couple, and it's the greatest gift you can give your children. I just know if I have an accident tomorrow, my wife and I, they will have each other. They're a close-knit community. They love each other. They will have each other's back for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, amen. We're getting very close to a break here, so I don't want to dive into another point, and I'm going to pause that and to wait till after the break. But there's just so much here. Maybe after the break, I want to talk about on several points. You brought up how you have personally received it, but I'm sure your whole family has been teased about, the Habsburg jaw, the inbreeding, so to speak, all of those, all of the slights that get put against you, especially on Twitter, I'm sure. But at the same time, when you talk about that, you talk about why Habsburgs married for certain reasons and why that was. I found that very fascinating, so I might want to come back with that. But also to defend law, to defend justice. But there's a question there. Where does the Catholic compromise? We're going to have those conversations with Archduke Eduard Habsburg, the ambassador to the Holy See and the Sovereign Order of Malta from Hungary, about his brand new book, The Habsburg Way, 7 Rules for Turbulent Times, which I'm giving away a free copy to one of you. Go to thestationofthecross.com/ACT. Sign up for the insider email list. I'll send you an email with the details, but don't go anywhere. More is coming up next. Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McLean. So good to be on with you. Praise be to God. We're going to be giving away a brand new copy of this brand new book, The Habsburg Way, 7 Rules for Turbulent Times, free to one of our ACT insiders. All you got to do is be on the email list. Just go to thestationofthecross.com/ACT to sign up for the insider email list. I'll send an email later today with all the instructions on how you can win your free copy of The Habsburg Way. But the Archduke is with us, Eduard Habsburg, the ambassador to the Holy See and the Sovereign Order of Malta from Hungary, and we're here to talk about this book. It is a good book. I really recommend it, especially if you're like me and you love history. There's a lot of great history being told here, but I love the fact that it also talks about some key fundamental things as Catholics: marriage, the value of marriage, the need to defend it, but also truth, justice, goodness, beauty, honor, integrity. I mean, there's just so many themes in this book. That's great. Mr. Ambassador, thank you again for your time today. Very grateful to you. Let's talk about there's more than one time in the book you mention being teased, insulted, really, because of the Habsburg jaw, like inbreeding in the family. So there was a time when the Habsburgs married, cousins quite frequently. It's a fairly common thing in the history of the world. But maybe you could speak of that, because I want to know more to the point that you talk about why the Habsburgs married the way they did. What was the point to that? It seemed like there was a very practical reason. But can you speak to that?
Yes, so that is an interesting topic, and if you go on Google and you type in Habsburg and you look for the most frequent searches, you will find Habsburg jaw as one of the first things, because it is the most visible and most absurd-looking feature of the Habsburgs, mostly in the 16th and 17th century. And yes, it happened during the time where there were two lines of the Habsburgs, the one descending from Emperor Charles V in Spain, and the other from his brother Ferdinand I in Austria. And they intermarried their children among each other over several generations, not out of some idea of purity of blood or something, but out of the practical necessity to keep the two halves of the Habsburg lands together. But that's not all. Another reason is also because you could be sure that they married the right person, because the other Habsburgs were raised in the same way, had a very similar faith experience, had very similar ideas about family. So that was an extra bonus to the fact that they kept the empire together. Now, about that famous Habsburg jaw that people love to throw at me on Twitter, thinking that I will recoil in horror every single time. It's getting tired very fast. It isn't a result of inbreeding. It is true that those about 150 years of very often marrying between the two lines didn't do the genetics well, and the Spanish line died out probably because of that. But the Habsburg jaw was already in the family before this marriage between two lines began. 2 generations above it was already. It came from a Polish princess that they married. So it has nothing to do in reality with the so-called inbreeding.
But you also mentioned that there was a death rate among infants in the Habsburgs that was 4 times higher than the average. I think that's what you said in the book. Yes. Which I think is a tragedy of that time and that period in your family. Your family must have undergone quite a bit of sorrow. We've lost children in my marriage, and it's a painful thing to happen. But 4 times higher, that must have been a pretty tragic situation.
Yes, we always imagine that if you have 16 children, then one more or less won't make a difference. But that's not true. These people suffered. They suffered terribly for their children who died. And it's true, the Spanish line died out, and they had a very, very high infant mortality rate, and that at a court where in theory you should have had the best medical help that you can find. But that was, of course, really because of the genetical degeneration that was really there. But of course, you didn't know about these things at the time. You just knew that you couldn't just marry cousins because you needed a dispensation from the Pope. But I also write in my book that one of the advantages of that time was, out of those, I think, 70 marriages that were made on different levels, nearly all of them were very, very happy. Both partners were very happy and had a happy marriage because they had the same set of values, the same faith, the same idea of family, and they understood their duties. So that was a difficult time. Later on, after the 18th century, 19th, the Habsburgs began to marry for love far more. Not all of these marriages went better. Some of them were even more difficult. And if you look at the situation today everybody can do whatever they want, never get married off, can have changing partners, don't have any responsibility. And I don't have the impression that people are much happier nowadays. So, yeah. Things to think about.
Yeah, for sure. Let's switch topics here as we're going to run out of time super fast. The defending truth, defending the law. One of the aspect of that I was thinking about when reading your book, what you talked about how the emperors had a sort of a duty to respect peoples, to respect languages, to respect cultures, that an emperor couldn't play favorites with his subjects. Makes sense. As a dad, I can't play favorites with my kids. And yet, my question is, as a Catholic emperor, as a Catholic, at what point must we push back to defend truth itself against cultures that would embrace error as a part of their culture? Can you give me a sense of that when it comes to the history of your family?
There is a very interesting moment in our family history. That was when Ferdinand II, who is the champion of counter-reformation, became emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. And the Habsburgs so far had always tried to balance between all sort of different languages, nationalities, habits in the different countries. But this was the moment that Reformation broke into the European landscape. And Ferdinand II said, I'm going to fight for the Catholic faith. I'm going to set measures to keep the Catholic faith in my countries. And not everybody thought like that. The Catholic Cardinal of Paris, Richelieu, who was a cardinal, thought that you could even make deals with the Muslims if that was good for the state. And he couldn't understand how Ferdinand would be so stupid not to follow the state reason. But Ferdinand said, I'm a Catholic emperor, first and foremost. I think this is very good. Of course, in history books, he's often maligned, while other emperors who made more deals with. On the other hand, it's true, the Habsburgs always stood for trying to give the different languages in the empire, the different countries in the empire, as far as it was possible, their own place, and to respect the lower level. Subsidiarity is a very important word in my book, and it's something that America is built upon. The United States are built upon the idea of respecting the lower level, building it up from the grassroots, building it up from the homestead, the township, the state. And the federal level should be the weakest level in a way, because that is United States. And the Habsburg lands, in a way, for a long time, and in many cases, were built exactly like that.
Yeah. We're down to probably the last question here. Let's talk about Blessed Karl of Austria. God rest his soul. Tragic story at the end of his time as emperor, but you also make a point to say that legally the Holy Roman Empire still exists. It wasn't legally done away with. Is that true?
I think the Holy Roman Empire is more of a lawyer's joke, that it's still around. But of course, I just say Blessed Karl was one of the best. If you go now on Twitter, you will find out that we're in the last duel of the Habsburg Championship, and it looks like he's winning. So he's a man worthwhile reading about, and we love him all very much in the family.
Amen. I would love to have you back to speak more specifically about Blessed Karl sometime. But the Archduke of Austria, Eduard Habsburg, and the ambassador to the Holy See from Hungary, thank you for your time today. Very grateful for our conversation. The Habsburg Way, 7 rules for turbulent times. Go to sophiainstitute.com for the details. We're going to put a link to it in our show notes, sophiainstitute.com. We're also going to give out a free copy of this if you just join the insider list. Go to thestationofthecross.com/ACT to get signed up today. God love you.